I have witnessed many horrors of war, yet few weapons have ever filled my heart with such a deep, unspoken dread as the living flame, that unnatural fire which no water could quench, Greek fire. Long before the world ever heard the crackling hiss of modern flamethrowers on blood-soaked battlefields, the seeds of this infernal creation were sown in the proud, embattled heart of Byzantium, where secret knowledge and divine whispers wove together to birth a weapon that seemed forged in the depths of hell itself. It was in the year 672. I remember it as if the air still carried the acrid scent of burning sails, when Constantinople stood defiant behind her mighty walls, her people weary yet unbroken beneath the shadow of the advancing Arab fleet. Under the banners of Muawiyah I, the Umayyad Caliphate, flush with recent victories, swept toward us with grim purpose, seeking to snuff out the light of our empire. And so we prepared and we waited. But when the dark hulls of their ships slid across the waters of the Golden Horn, it was not merely our steel or our stones that greeted them. It was fire. I stood on the deck of a swift droman, the pride of our navy, as the order was given. The bronze siphons roared to life with a sound not unlike thunder rolling from the heavens, and from their gaping maws poured torrents of liquid flame, thick, clinging, and insatiable. The enemy's ships writhed in the inferno, their sailors' screams drowned beneath the furious crackle of a fire that would not die, not even beneath the waves. The sea itself seemed aflame. This was the weapon we called Greek fire, though many whispered darker names in the shadows. Some spoke of its inventor, a clever Syrian Callinicus of Heliopolis, driven by fate and necessity to our court after fleeing the Arab advance. They say he brought his secret to Emperor Constantine IV, a gift that would forever alter the tides of war. Others, more cautious or perhaps more cynical, believed the weapon arose from the labor of many nameless chemists and engineers, the true formula veiled in secrecy even from those of us who wielded it. What went into its making? That was a secret guarded with blood and fire. They whispered of petroleum and sulfur, of quicklime and pine resin, even of saltpeter, but none could say for certain. And those who dared pry too deeply often vanished or met strange ends. I remember the words of the great Constantine VII himself, whose writings forbade the revealing of this knowledge to foreign lands, declaring that even angels had warned against its betrayal. "Let any who would steal this secret be cursed," he wrote, and so we believed. The weapon's power lay not only in its substance, but in its delivery. From bronze siphons upon ship prows and fortress walls powered by compressed air and mighty pumps, the fire could leap across 15 meters or more, striking with a roar that seemed to shake the very sky. I still hear it in my dreams, that terrible sound, the rush of searing flame. I was there too when we turned this terrible gift against our foes, first in the siege of Constantinople from 674 to 678, when the Arab fleet was driven back by our fire-bearing ships. Again, in 717, when Maslama's forces came in great numbers, seeking to breach our walls, and once more our siphons spewed their dreadful streams, driving the invaders to ruin. Theophanes the Confessor chronicled that day, and I have read his words, yet the truth of it, the raw terror, can never be captured in mere parchment. I remember standing upon the city walls during that long siege, watching as wave after wave of Arab fire ships approached only for our own vessels to sweep forth flame leaping into the night. The blackened husks of enemy galleys drifted upon the tide, the water stained with soot and oil. It was not mere battle. It was a vision of the underworld made manifest, and still the fire served us in ways both grand and grim. Against the Rus in 941, as their dragon-proud ships dared our waters, we unleashed Greek fire yet again. They fled in terror, their chronicles dark with the memory of that day. Even in the cold Northlands, the tale spread a warning to all who would test our wrath. I myself bore one of the portable siphons, crude, heavy things they were during the bitter wars against the Bulgarians. I remember the weight of it, the acrid scent of the fuel, the fierce heat upon my face when the flame burst forth. It was a weapon for close quarters for desperate men. To hold it was to command the power of destruction, yet also to feel the gnawing fear, for should the vessel rupture, should enemy arrows find their mark, the bearer would perish in flames no less than his foes. Yet even mighty secrets fade with time. In 1204, when the Western Crusaders tore through our city's heart, the art of Greek fire had already begun to slip from our grasp. The Venetians mourned its loss, and so did I, for with it ended an age of our supremacy. The fire was gone, but its legend endured. And I, who once stood amidst those waves of flame, can still see their glow upon the waters of memory. I have walked through the trenches of the Great War, where the earth itself seemed to weep beneath the weight of endless shell fire, where the air hung thick with gas and smoke, and where men huddled like ghosts in the muddy embrace of the earth, waiting for death to find them. It was there, amidst this grim theater of modern war, that I first beheld the rebirth of ancient flame, the flamethrower, not as some relic of Byzantium, but as a monstrous new weapon forged in the crucible of industrial slaughter. The year was 1915, when rumors began to stir through the ranks. Whispers of a terrible device the Germans had conceived, a weapon that would hurl burning death across the no man's land. I had heard of its creator, Richard Fiedler, an engineer whose restless mind had long toyed with the forces of fire and pressure, crafting a device that could spew burning oil in a roaring stream that reached 20 meters or more. At first, even the German officers had doubted him, or so they said, but war breeds desperation, and desperation invention. By 1908, the weapon had become more than theory, and by early 1915, a dedicated unit. The Flammenwerfer Abteilung had been born, its men trained in secret to wield this fearsome new arm of war. I remember that first attack well, June 25th in the Argonne, when German pioneers crept forward before dawn, their burdens heavy upon their backs, long hoses trailing behind them, like the coils of some mechanical serpent. Then came the signal, a shrill whistle that split the morning mist, and with it, a torrent of flame erupted, leaping from the German lines in waves of searing gold and crimson. The screams of the French defenders echoed across the charred trenches. Men fled in terror, their very flesh ablaze. Henri Barbusse wrote of that day, "I can still hear his words as if the gates of hell had opened before us. And I thought I stood upon another front, heard of it within hours." All of us did. The flame had returned to war. In the weeks and months that followed, the weapon spread like wildfire itself. The Germans, emboldened by their success, formed more units, fielded more devices. The bulky, fuel-laden tanks carried by grim men who now bore the name Devils of Malancourt. I saw them at Verdun, February 1916, when the great German assault began. I saw the twisted wreckage of French bunkers, their stones blackened, their steel melted, their defenders lost to fire. I remember one French officer's words scrawled in a battered diary. "Hell cannot be so terrible. Men are mad with horror and suffering." Yes, we were all mad by then. Flame in war is a madness both for those who wield it and those who endure it, and so we, the Allies, could not stand idle. The British, under Lieutenant William Livens, forged their own answer, great fixed projectors of flame, the Livens galleries, which belched forth burning death across the Somme in 1916. I watched the skies glow red that day as trenches vanished in the inferno. The French followed with their own Schilt models, crude but effective, and soon flamethrowers of many shapes and sizes stalked the fronts. When my own country entered the war late and reluctant, we too borrowed the fire first from the French, then crafting our own, the M1A1, which I carried in the bitter closing months of the war. Heavy, it was cumbersome and slow, yet in the tangled ruins of machine gun nests and bunkers, there was no better tool. I have stood before an enemy position, with that thing upon my back, fingers trembling upon the trigger, knowing that in a moment I might bring ruin or death, perhaps my own, if the tanks ruptured beneath enemy fire. Many comrades I lost in those days. Flamethrower men were marked for death, their burden a blazing target. I have seen a sniper's bullet pierce a fuel tank. I have seen friends become living torches, their screams rising above the roar of guns. We cursed the weight we feared the flames, yet we carried on, for in that place of mud and horror there was little choice. And so the war dragged on the fire, spreading with it. I heard tell of larger engines, the Grossflammenwerfer, great machines that hurled flame 40 meters and more, while the British mounted flamethrowers upon their tanks. Yet even these could not turn the tide. No fire, no machine could end that endless slaughter. Still, in those last terrible offensives of 1918, Operation Michael, among them the Germans unleashed their fire in wave after wave, over 100 attacks in mere days. I stood in the battered lines, then watching the night skies flicker with unnatural light, hearing the cries of the wounded and the burning. It was a sight to sear the soul. One Canadian chaplain, Frederick George Scott, wrote of it, "To see men burned alive is a sight that makes one question the very foundations of civilization." Indeed, I too have questioned. I still do. When the guns finally fell silent that November, the fire remained burned into our minds, into our nightmares. The flamethrower had carved its place in the arsenals of modern war. And though we told ourselves such things should never be seen again, in truth, we knew the fire would rise again. I had thought, oh, how foolish I had been, that after the horrors of the Great War, we might never again turn to such cruel tools as the flamethrower, that mankind might recoil from the fire that had burned so many souls in the mud of France. But war as ever breeds new hungers, and as the world was once more plunged into darkness in 1939, I found myself again in uniform once more upon battlefields where death came in fire, steel, and smoke. And there, in that vast and terrible conflict, the flamethrower returned, refined, perfected, made more terrible than ever before. I remember well the first time I saw the German Flammenwerfer 35, not in the field at first, but in the trembling reports that reached us, tales of Zippos, as the enemy soldiers grimly called them, of streams of burning death hurled across the hedgerows of France. The thing weighed near 80 pounds. They said its tanks slung upon the back of a man doomed to be both hunter and hunted. And soon the stories grew darker still of SS troops at Le Paradis, where British prisoners had been herded and murdered after the flamethrowers had cleared their positions in a storm of fire. The massacre haunted us all, a bitter foretaste of the war's true face. Yet the Germans were not alone in wielding flame. In the frozen hell of Stalingrad, I stood beside my comrades as we watched Soviet assault teams advance with their ROKS-2 flamethrowers, weapons more nimble than the German designs and no less deadly. I remember the breath of fire pouring from the shattered windows of ruined factories. The brick walls blackened, the snow itself scorched to soot and ash. Vasily Chekhov wrote of those days, "The flamethrower was our most effective weapon in street fighting," and I knew his words to be true. In that city of ghosts, the fire ruled the day. The Americans, too, took up the weapon in their long and bloody struggle across the Pacific. I heard of their M22s first from whispered accounts, then from men who had seen them in battle, flamethrowers used to scour the caves of Peleliu to purge the stubborn defenders of Iwo Jima. I remember the stories of Private Watson, who earned his glory in those hellish places, his stream of flame cutting down scores of the enemy. I wondered as I read of it, what scars such acts must have left upon his soul. For none who bore the flame remained unchanged. I have seen the fear in the eyes of men sent forward with flamethrowers upon their backs, knowing that to the enemy they were marked, that no mercy would be shown if captured, no quarter given if seen. Even among our own ranks there was unease, for the weapon was cursed in its way, both a shield and a burden. I knew flamethrower men who covered their tanks beneath ordinary gear, hoping to avoid the sniper's bullet or the shrapnel that might ignite their terrible load. And oh, the effect upon the enemy, I saw it with my own eyes. At Peleliu, I watched as caves once silent burst into flame, as soldiers who would have fought to the death instead threw down their weapons, their courage broken by the sight of advancing flame. It was not the heat alone nor the pain of burning flesh. It was the dread of a death without honor, without hope. Even General Patton, that hard man of iron, will saw its value. Let the Hun do the holding. We are advancing constantly, he said, and with fire we advanced indeed. Yet though the weapon served us still, its use stirred dark questions. I heard it often around campfires and in quiet moments between the battles. Was it right, this burning of men alive? Did necessity justify the horror we unleashed? I, too, could not answer. I had seen villages burned, bunkers seared to ruin. I had smelled the charred flesh and heard the screams that haunted the night. There was no glory in such work, and so the war ground on from France to Berlin, from Okinawa to the heart of the Reich. In those final desperate days, I saw flamethrowers used to clear the ruins of Berlin itself. Red Army troops driving fire through the shattered bones of the city, flushing out the last defenders from their rubble-strewn holes. I remember hearing of the Hitler Youth burned from the basements of the Reichstag, even as their leader lay dead above them, a final act of fire in a war of endless flame. In the Pacific, too, the burning never ceased at Okinawa, where thousands perished, soldiers and civilians alike, trapped in caves that became fiery tombs. I heard the grim statistics: hundreds of portable flamethrowers, dozens of tanks fitted for the task, all pouring flame into the darkness. And still the fighting dragged on, the fires fed by desperation and hate. When at last the war ended, and I stood again beneath a quiet sky, I looked back upon what we had wrought. The flamethrower had proven itself a weapon of dreadful power, but also one of moral weight. The years to come would see treaties bans upon its use against the helpless, yet the weapon itself, the fire, would remain. And I, who had seen its rise, knew well, once born, such flames are never truly extinguished. I had thought I understood the weapons of this terrible new war, the mortars, the machine guns, the grinding steel of the tanks. But nothing prepared me for the sight of the crocodile, that monstrous iron beast that breathed fire like some ancient dragon reborn. I remember the first time I laid eyes upon it, squat, hulking, trailing behind it, that sinister fuel trailer, like the swollen belly of some great serpent. There was a weight to it, a presence that chilled the blood even before it moved, and when its terrible breath was loosed, then no man could stand unmoved. They called it the Churchill crocodile, and rightly so, for it was no mere tank, but a creature of pure terror, designed to strike not only at the body, but at the mind of its foes. I learned of its origins soon enough, born from the desperate genius of the Petroleum Warfare Department, a shadowy branch that dreamed of turning the very elements of nature into weapons. Donald Banks, its unlikely master, an oil man turned warrior, had driven the work forward, and the hands of Major General Percy Hobart had shaped the beast for war. His division, Hobart's Funnies, they were called crafted machines to break the stalemates of modern battle, and the crocodile was their darkest creation. I recall hearing of its trials those early days when prototypes sputtered and failed, when accidents set fields alight and nearly claimed the lives of their creators. Yet they persevered, and in time the crocodile emerged armed with a 75mm gun and a coaxial machine gun like any Churchill tank, but bearing also that fearsome flamethrower capable of hurling a river of burning fuel up to 120 yards. I cannot forget the roar of its jets, nor the thick, choking smoke that followed in its wake. Its first true baptism of fire came upon the beaches of Normandy. I was there amidst the chaos of D-Day when the crocodiles landed. I saw them crawl forward through the blasted sands, their sponsons gleaming black with oil, their trailers swaying as they moved. And when they reached the enemy strongpoints, when their flame licked out across pillboxes and trenches, the effect was terrible to behold. Men who would have fought to the death fled before that living fire. Hardened veterans raised their hands in surrender, eyes wide with dread. I heard one captured German officer murmur, "We were prepared to fight tanks, but not dragons." Again and again I saw the crocodiles brought forward at Crepin, at Le Havre, at Falaise. Their flame cleared the way when all else had failed. I remember Captain David Render speaking of it. "Nobody wants to be burned alive," he said. And he was right. The mere sight of the crocodiles often broke the enemy before a shot was fired. I followed their progress through France, through Belgium, into the cold heart of Germany. At Le Havre, I witnessed the crocodiles lead the assault, deep bunkers reduced to smoldering tombs, defenders emerging with soot-blackened faces and trembling limbs. Over 11,000 prisoners were taken that day, many surrendering at the first glimpse of the flame tanks. I stood beside General Roberts himself as he observed the battle, and I heard him say, "The mere sight of the crocodiles was enough." Yet for all their power, the beasts were not invulnerable. I knew men who rode in those tanks, brave souls who spoke with grim humor of the risks they faced. The trailers, though armored, were vulnerable still, and when struck, the explosions could be terrible. I remember one account, Lieutenant John Hansard's tank struck near Gauque, the fuel trailer torn apart in a blossom of fire. Miraculously, he and his crew survived, but the fear never left them. It was like riding a powder keg, he said, and so it was. By war's end, 800 of these steel dragons had been forged. I saw them deployed not only in the fields of France, but in the hills of Italy, where they clawed through the Gothic line, their flames rolling through German fortifications like some avenging wind. I remember Operation Vampire, April 1945, where the crocodiles of the North Irish Horse cleared the way for our advance, their breath scorching a path through the enemy lines. When I think now upon those days, the memories come not only in images, but in sensations, the heat upon my face as the crocodile fired, the acrid stench of burning fuel, the ash that drifted like snow upon the wind. And I remember too the faces of the enemy, the fear in their eyes, the broken will that followed in the wake of fire. For though the crocodile was a machine of war, it was also a weapon of terror, one that spoke to something primal within us all. To face bullets, shells, even tanks, these a soldier might endure. But to face the flame, to see it coming, and know that no armor, no trench, no prayer would spare you, that was a horror few could withstand. And though the war has ended, and the crocodiles now rest as relics of another time, I know that the shadow of their flame lingers still, a warning perhaps, of the terrible things we are willing to create in the name of victory. I thought I had seen all the ways fire could be used in war, in the ruins of Berlin, in the trenches of Verdun, in the pillboxes of Normandy. But nothing had prepared me for the inferno that awaited in the green hell of Vietnam. It was a land of endless jungle where the heat pressed down like a living thing, where every shadow might hide a deadly trap or an unseen enemy. The Viet Cong ghosts in the foliage moved unseen through tunnels and tangled brush, striking and vanishing, as though the earth itself had swallowed them. And so once again we turn to the flame, for there is no darkness that fire cannot reach. I still remember General Westmoreland's words spoken with grim conviction: the jungle itself is the enemy, and we must deny it sanctuary. And deny it we did, though, at a cost that weighs heavy upon my soul to this day. The M97 flamethrower was the weapon we carried then, 65 pounds of fuel and steel slung upon a man's back like some terrible cross. In my hands, the nozzle felt more like a serpent eager to spit death at the slightest touch. I can still hear the hiss as the fuel ignited the roar, as the flame leapt out into the green. I was first trained with it at Fort Riley in '66. Even there in the safety of exercise grounds, the sight of that wall of fire shook me to my core. One of the instructors joked we were holding the power of hell in our hands, and I believed him. It was a power both terrible and seductive one that gave you control over life and death in an instant. Yet in the steaming jungles of Vietnam, it was not just a weapon. It was a shield, a way to survive against an enemy who could strike from any shadow. I used it first in the tunnels of Cu Chi, a labyrinth beneath the earth, dark and airless, stretching for miles beneath the jungle floor. Bombs and bulldozers could not touch those tunnels, nor gas or grenades. And so we crawled into them, the so-called tunnel rats, faces slick with sweat, weapons clutched tight. The flamethrower was our salvation down there. A burst of fire would strip the tunnels of oxygen, would end the fight in seconds. Though what it left behind, the scorched walls, the charred bodies, those sights haunt my dreams still. I will never forget March 18th, 1966, the day my team found a large chamber deep in the Cu Chi network. A group of Viet Cong fighters had holed up inside, ready for a last stand. Bullets failed us too many twists, too little space. And so, with shaking hands, I brought forth the flame. The fire roared through the chamber, and their screams echoed down the tunnels long after the flames had died. I remember writing of it later. The screams. I'll never forget those screams. But it was not only below the ground that we carried the fire. In the jungle itself, in the clearings where choppers would land in the bunkers, hidden beneath tangled roots, everywhere the enemy lurked. So too did we bring the flame. I saw entire tree lines vanish in seconds, foliage curling and blackening under the relentless heat. I heard one of my comrades say it was like watching Dante's Inferno come to life, and he was right. For the Viet Cong, the fear of fire was greater than that of bullets or bombs. Nguyen Van Ly, one of those who survived such an attack, would later speak of it. We feared many things, the bombs, the gas. But the fire, it was like facing the anger of the gods. I saw that fear in their eyes, in the way hardened fighters surrendered rather than face the flames. The fire stripped away not only life but hope, leaving only ashes behind. We were not alone in wielding it. I remember the rumble of the M132 armored flamethrowers, Zippos, we called them, great steel beasts, based on the M113 APC. Their nozzles capable of sending burning fuel 200 meters or more. I watched them clear the jungle like farmers burning a field, only these fields were filled with traps, with enemy bunkers, with hidden death. Captain Ellison once said, it was like mowing the lawn if the lawn was full of booby traps and enemy soldiers. Yet with each burst of flame, the questions grew louder in my heart. Was this the only way? Was this what victory demanded of us? I remember Corporal Anderson, a fellow operator, speaking of it in hushed tones. It was effective, no doubt, but the screams, they stay with you, and they did. The smell, the sounds, they became part of us, burned into memory, as deeply as the flames had burned the earth. And even as we brought the fire, the enemy learned to fight it, building deeper tunnels, creating fireproof chambers, adding twists and turns to deny the flames their prey. We dug deeper, they dug deeper still, a terrible race to outmatch one another's horrors. I remember Specialist Burns, the last American recorded to use a flamethrower in combat, writing of it in 1970. It felt like closing a chapter of the war, but not one I'm proud of. And as I stood there, in the iron triangle, watching the last tendrils of smoke drift through the trees, I knew that the fire had left its mark upon me as surely as upon the land. From Kuchi to Te Nin, from Hue to the tunnels of the iron triangle, the flame had shaped this war and those who fought it. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can still see the jungle burning, can still hear the voices of the past. And I wonder, as I have so many times, what price did we pay in fire and in flesh for the ground we gained? Now as I sit beneath the quieter sky, the years heavy upon my shoulders, and the wars of my youth faded into memory, I find myself still haunted by the weapon I once carried by the fire that time and again I loosed upon my fellow man. I have seen many things in my lifetime: the rise and fall of empires, the march of progress, the glimmer of hope that sometimes follows even the darkest night. But nothing remains with me so vividly, so indelibly, as the glow of flame against the sky as the faces twisted in terror at its approach. For I was there when the first modern flamethrowers howled across the trenches of the Great War. I watched the dawn break over the Argonne, where fire and screams mingled with the morning mist. I stood again in the shattered cities of Europe, where the Churchill crocodiles spewed their dread breath into bunkers and fortifications, where enemies surrendered not to steel or bullets, but to the primal fear of burning. And later still, beneath the emerald canopy of Vietnam's jungles, I wielded the flamethrower once more in tunnels and thickets in the shadows, where unseen eyes watched and waited, knowing that with each burst of fire I was bringing not only death, but an agony beyond words. Through it all, I have asked myself, as so many others have, what does this weapon truly mean? Is it merely another tool of war, no different from bomb or bullet? Or is there something deeper, something more terrible in the nature of fire itself? For while bullets kill quickly and bombs from afar, the flame forces a man to face the full horror of his end, to see it coming, to feel its touch. And for those of us who bore the flame, who loosed it upon the world, it leaves scars, unseen wounds that no salve can heal. I think often of the men I served beside of Corporal Herschel Williams, who earned his glory in the inferno of Iwo Jima, his courage undeniable yet shadowed by the cost; of Sergeant Yakov Pavlov, who helped drive the Germans from Stalingrad, wielding the weapon that burned their foes from the ruins. Brave men, yes, but forever marked as I am by the things they did in the name of victory. And as the years passed, and the world sought to turn away from such horrors, still the questions remained. Treaties were written, weapons banned, yet the knowledge of flame once unleashed cannot be undone. The words of Oppenheimer echo often in my mind. Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. He spoke of the atom, of course, but I knew, as I know still, that those words speak equally of fire. For whether in the volcanic ash of Iwo Jima, in the frozen ruins of Stalingrad, in the steaming jungles of Vietnam, the flamethrower left behind a legacy of destruction, of fear, of questions that no war can fully answer. And I, one who once bore its weight upon my back, who watched the world burn beneath its touch, can only wonder what price have we paid in soul and in spirit for the flames we kindled. And as I look to the future, to a world still so quick to anger, so eager to arm itself anew, I cannot help but feel a chill, for though the wars may change, though the weapons may grow ever more terrible, the fire remains waiting in the darkness of men's hearts. And it falls to us, the ones who remember to speak of these things, to remind the world of the cost of such power, and to hope in whatever time we have left that the flames of the past might not consume the days to come.